My daughter-in-law claimed she was stuck in a big meeting, but I was already sitting in the hotel lobby watching her walk in with some guy who definitely wasn't my son. I didn't call again. I just left an envelope at the front desk and waited to see what would happen when she opened it and who would end up losing everything in the end. "Stop calling me Evelyn. I'm in an important meeting," my daughter-in-law snapped into the phone. It was almost funny because I was standing no more than 15 feet away in the lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. I watched her lean into this man who was clearly not my son Caleb. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, making the whole scene look almost peaceful. But inside me, everything had gone ice cold and crystal clear. I hung up without a word, smoothed down my coat, and settled into one of those deep leather armchairs in the back of the lobby. Ever since my husband passed 3 years ago, I'd been living with Caleb and Brooke in my house out in the suburbs of Phoenix. It was my house paid for, with decades of grinding work at our little family bakery. I thought I was buying love. I was actually just funding my own obsolescence. The silence in the house was deafening, but for the first time, it was also clear. If they wanted me to figure it out myself, I was going to do exactly that. I stood up. She'd said to Caleb the other week, not realizing I was right in the next room. Caleb had just nodded the way he always did when she spoke. I watched Brooke brush a lock of hair off the guy's forehead and laugh that loud, possessive laugh that didn't match the stressed-out career woman she pretended to be at home. She took a room key and disappeared with him into the elevator. I didn't feel tears, just a quiet confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. All that money for her so-called professional development had been coming straight out of my account, thanks to the power of attorney I'd naively given her. I stood up and walked over to the front desk. The young woman there gave me a professional smile. I pulled out the thick envelope I'd prepared that morning. "Could you please give this to Brooke Caldwell when she checks out?" I said calmly. The receptionist looked a little puzzled, but my gaze didn't waver. Right then, I knew the time for staying quiet was over. The drive back to our quiet neighborhood in Glendale was dead silent. I kept my eyes on the road while my mind clicked through the next steps like well-oiled gears. When I unlocked the front door, the smell of Brooke's overpriced candles hit me. My old oak sideboard, an heirloom from my mother, had been replaced by some sleek, white, modern thing. Caleb was in the living room, glued to his laptop, and barely glanced up when I walked in. He looked worn out, almost see-through in his passivity. Brooke's still in that meeting. "She'll be home later," he muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. It stung a little how easily the lie slipped out, mostly because he actually believed it. I set my bag down and headed to the kitchen. There on the fridge were the plans for the new backyard Brooke wanted to redesign, which basically meant ripping out my rose bushes for some sterile stone patio. I grabbed the marker and drew one big fat X right through the whole drawing. "Mom, what are you doing?" Caleb asked, finally appearing in the doorway. I looked at him and for the first time in a long while didn't see the little boy I'd always protected. I saw a man who'd forgotten how to stand up for what was right. "I'm taking back my own garden, Caleb," I said, simply. He blinked, surprised by my directness, but didn't argue. He was used to me backing down to keep the peace. I went to my room and sat at the little writing desk. In front of me were the bank statements from the last 3 months. Brooke had been quietly draining amounts that went way beyond household expenses. She probably figured the old widow wasn't checking the numbers anymore. But I'd run that bakery for 30 years. Bookkeeping was second nature to me. I logged into online banking on my phone and with a few clicks, changed the password and cut off all her access. When I turned off the light that night, I felt like the rightful owner of my own house for the first time in months. The next morning, the kitchen air felt thick with tension. Brooke had snuck in late the night before and was now poking at her yogurt, scrolling on her phone. She already had her power suit on the busy professional mask locked in place. Caleb read the paper while I poured my coffee nice and slow. Evelyn, I couldn't pick up yesterday. It was crazy, stressful, Brooke said suddenly, not even looking up. The negotiations ran really late. I watched her over the rim of my mug. She lies as easy as breathing, I thought. I know, Brooke. I was out myself, I replied calmly. Her thumb froze over the screen. Oh yeah. Where I just gave a small smile and didn't answer. Silence was turning out to be my best weapon. After breakfast, Brooke tried to do the weekly grocery order online like always. I caught her cursing at her laptop from the corner of my eye. Caleb, did you mess with the account? My card's getting declined and the password won't work, she called out. Caleb shrugged. I stepped into the living room dish towel in hand. I changed the access, Brooke. From now on, I'm handling my own finances. We need to start watching our spending. Her eyes narrowed. Spending for what? We had an agreement that I'd handle the household stuff. Her tone was sharp, almost condescending. I saw Caleb shift uncomfortably, but I held my ground. The agreement's over. If you two want to keep living here, I expect you to chip in properly for the utilities starting next month, cash or transfer, your choice. Brooke let out a disbelieving laugh. Chip in. We're helping you out, Evelyn. Without us, you'd be all alone in this old place. Classic emotional blackmail, the kind she always pulled. But this time, it bounced right off. I turned without a word and headed out to the garden. I'd already started marking spots for the new rose beds. The envelope at the hotel would be opened soon enough, and I wanted to be ready. Around midday, Brooke left the house, claiming she had a quick office errand. I knew she was probably heading back to the hotel to grab a forgotten scarf, or maybe that envelope. I used the time to pull her boxes up from the basement and put back everything she'd moved without asking. My sideboard soon stood in its old spot again, solid and honest. 2 hours later, her car screeched into the driveway. The front door flew open. Brooke stormed in, face pale, as a sheet clutching the opened envelope. Inside were no threats, no lawyer letters, just copies of the hotel bill. Photos I'd snapped on my phone of her laughing with her lover at the bar, and a full list of every unauthorized withdrawal from my account. What the hell is this? Evelyn, she screamed, her voice cracking. Caleb came running in from the backyard, startled by the noise. He stared at the papers, trembling in her hand. I stood calmly in the kitchen, slicing bread. Just the facts, Brooke. Nothing more, I said without looking up. Caleb stepped closer and took one of the sheets from her. I watched his face go completely still when he saw the photo. Brooke. Who is that? He asked, his voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the room. She immediately went on the attack. That's a setup. Your mother's been spying on me. She's trying to tear us apart. Caleb, can't you see that? She reached for his arm, but for the first time in his life, he pulled away. The evidence was too clear, the setting too obvious. I set the knife down and looked at both of them. This isn't about what I want. It's about what's happening in my house. I'm not funding affairs, and I'm not letting anyone push me out of my own home. Brooke was breathing hard, her eyes searching for another lie. But that envelope felt like a verdict with no appeal. The kitchen fell into a silence heavier than any shouting match. You're not just kicking me out like that, Brooke hissed an hour later from their bedroom. I could hear her arguing with Caleb through the closed door. But Caleb sounded different this time, not angry, just worn down. I sat in the living room reading a book like nothing had happened. In a house that's truly yours, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Soon, Caleb came out alone and sat across from me, shoulders slumped. Mom, I had no idea. I swear, he said hoarsely. I believed him. His blind trust had always been his biggest weakness, but it was genuine. "I know, son. But you looked the other way while she pushed me aside." That's when she figured she could get away with anything. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I set my book aside. "Starting tomorrow, things change. I've already called the locksmith. The house is getting divided into clear zones. You two get the upstairs. The kitchen and living room are mine. If you want to use them, we follow my rules. No redecorating, no late-night guests, and full transparency on money." Caleb looked stunned. "You're not throwing her out." "Not yet," I said, coolly. "She owes me. Every dollar she took from my account gets paid back or worked off. She'll handle the household chores my way. If she doesn't like it, she can leave today, but without a dime from your inheritance or my savings." I knew Brooke wasn't going anywhere. She needed the money and the lifestyle this house gave her. When Brooke came downstairs later, her eyes were full of hate, but she stayed quiet. She'd finally realized the power balance had shifted. I handed her a list of weekend chores. "Start with the basement, Brooke. I want my old things back upstairs." She took the paper with 2 fingers like it was dirty. It wasn't a victory of the heart, but it was a victory of reality. The next few days settled into a strange, almost clinical routine. Brooke moved through the house like a shadow, cleaning, rearranging, running errands exactly as I specified. I checked every receipt. There was no room left for meetings or spontaneous trips. Caleb started focusing better at work. He almost seemed relieved the fake front had finally crumbled, even if the pieces hurt. One afternoon, I watched from the window as Brooke prepared my rose beds under my instructions. Her expensive manicure was ruined, her clothes smudged with dirt. I didn't feel sorry. If you want to control other people's lives, you'd better learn to manage your own first. I stepped outside and stood beside her. "Dig that soil deeper, Brooke. Otherwise, the roots won't take," I said, kindly but firmly. She paused and looked up. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me like this?" Her voice was bitter. I shook my head. "No, Brooke. I'm just glad my garden is finally going back to the way it should be. Real order isn't something you force on others. It's something you live by example." She kept digging in silence. Right then, I realized she'd never truly understand what respect meant. For her, everything was just a transaction. That evening, the 3 of us sat at the table. I'd cooked meatloaf with mashed potatoes, a dish Brooke hated, but Caleb loved. We talked about nothing important: the weather, the neighbors fixing the roof. It wasn't warm family harmony, but it was a functioning household. I had control of my property and my time again. Caleb started looking me in the eye once more. Still, I knew Brooke was quietly plotting in the background. People like her don't change just because they pull a few weeds. She was looking for a crack in the system, a way to pull Caleb back to her side. But I'd already lined up the next move. Nothing dramatic, just the straightforward kind of paperwork that settles things for good. I wasn't about to hand my house over to a con artist without a fight. "I need the car on Thursday for a meeting downtown," Brooke announced at dinner, using her old bossy tone. I set my fork down and looked at her calmly. "The car is mine, Brooke. And on Thursday, I'm driving it to visit my friend Linda up in Flagstaff. You can take the bus, the stop's only a 10-minute walk." Her face turned red, but Caleb said nothing. He just stared at his plate. Over the next weeks, I kept setting firm boundaries. I put simple locks on my bedroom and office doors, not out of fear, but to make a point. This is my private space. Brooke tried several times to turn Caleb against me. I'd hear her whispering at night. "Your mom's turned cruel, she's basically tormenting me." But Caleb saw every day how she slacked off the moment my back was turned. One afternoon, I came home early from the store and found Brooke in my office, rummaging through my papers, probably hunting for my will or property deeds. I stood in the doorway and cleared my throat. She spun around, letters in hand. I was just looking for the electric bill, she stammered. I took the papers from her without a word. The electric bill is in the kitchen, Brooke. You know that, I said, with a coldness that clearly shook her. This is the last time you step foot in this room. If it happens again, our arrangement ends immediately, and you two can find an apartment. The threat hung heavy in the air. Renting in the Phoenix area wasn't cheap, especially without my support. She left with her head down, but I caught the angry spark in her eyes. She felt cornered, and a cornered animal eventually bites. I knew she'd try to paint me as confused or mean, but I'd already been keeping a calm, factual journal of every interaction, and I'd placed a small, discreet camera on the shelf. That evening, I called Caleb in for a serious talk, just the two of us. "Mom, I can't keep going like this," Caleb said when we were alone in the kitchen. He looked broken. "Brooke's making my life hell. She says you physically attacked her in the office." I wasn't surprised. It was the clumsy smear I'd expected. I slid my journal across the table along with the small camera I'd hidden. "Look for yourself, Caleb." The camera recorded everything. She was digging through my private papers, and I never laid a hand on her, I explained quietly. Caleb watched the footage. His expression shifted from worry to pure disgust. He saw his wife greedily searching my drawers and heard my calm, matter-of-fact voice. The lie was so obvious, there was no defense left. "She's been lying to me about everything," he whispered. "Not just the guy at the hotel." He buried his face in his hands. It hurt to see my son like that, but it was necessary healing. He had to hit bottom before he could stand steady again. I put my hand on his. "You've got two choices, Caleb. Go down with her or start fresh." He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a real spark of resolve in his eyes. "I want her gone, but she won't leave without a fight. She says she has rights because she's listed here." I gave a thin smile. "She has the right to reasonable notice, that's about it. Since there's no lease and she never paid utilities, her position is pretty weak." That night, an eerie calm settled over the house. Brooke probably thought her plan had worked, and Caleb would come at me with accusations. She had no idea her own husband was already packing her bags. I sat in my armchair, feeling the circle finally close. The house was mine. My life was mine. And soon, the peace would be too. Tomorrow, the final act would begin. The next morning didn't start with yelling. It started with the cold precision of business. Caleb had already boxed up Brooke's things and stacked them in the hallway. When she came out of the bathroom and saw the piles, she froze. "What is this, Caleb?" "Some kind of sick joke?" she asked, voice shrill. But Caleb wouldn't even look at her. He just handed her an envelope. "This is official notice to vacate the house, Brooke. I booked you a room at a decent motel for the first 2 weeks." That's all he said, with a firmness I hadn't heard from him in years. Brooke laughed hysterically. "You can't throw me out." "I'm your wife," Caleb shook his head. "You're the wife who cheated on me and stole from my mother. That's enough." She turned to me, eyes full of venom. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? The lonely widow who gets her son all to herself." I stood up calmly and opened the front door. Fresh morning air poured in. "No, Brooke. I just wanted an honest family. Since you're not part of that, there's no place for you here anymore." I nodded toward the boxes. "Caleb will help you load up. Then hand over the keys." It took 3 hours. 3 hours of insults, tears, and desperate attempts to flip the script. But we both stayed silent. We didn't feed her drama. That's the trick. Cut off the fuel, and the fire dies on its own. Finally, she slammed the car door and drove off without looking back. As her car disappeared down the street, Caleb's shoulders dropped. He looked at me almost shy. Now what he asked. I picked up the spare keys she'd tossed on the sideboard and slipped them into my pocket. Now we make some tea. Caleb. Then we fix up the guest room upstairs the way it used to be. The silence in the house finally felt peaceful instead of empty. 8 months have passed. These days, when I sit on my patio sipping coffee in the morning, it feels like things were never any different. My roses are blooming a deep, rich red. The oak sideboard in the living room catches the sunlight and shines. The smell of Brooke's fancy candles is long gone. Caleb still lives upstairs, but he's a different man now. He takes responsibility, helps with the garden, and we split costs fairly. Brooke tried reaching out a few times, sometimes playing the pity card, sometimes making demands. I sent every letter back unopened. We settled the money side quietly without a nasty court fight. She knew my evidence of her stealing would have cost her her job. Sometimes the threat of the truth works better than the truth itself. She's gone now, somewhere in the city, out of our lives, for good. Caleb has started reconnecting with old friends Brooke had pushed away. He laughs again, a real deep belly laugh. Yesterday, he suggested we update the kitchen my way. I nodded and smiled. Not so much about the new cabinets, but because he actually asked instead of deciding over my head. I'm pushing 70 now. A lot of people would say, at this age, you should just sit back and let things happen. But I've learned you're never too old to stand up for your own dignity. You don't need big scenes police or lawyers to protect your life. You just need a clear eye, a steady heart, and the willingness to open the door when it matters or close it for good. I take a sip of my tea. It's hot, honest, and exactly how I like it. The day stretches out ahead, bright and clear. I'm not the old lady who needs structure anymore. I'm Evelyn, and this is my house. I stand up, grab my garden shears, and head over to the roses. There's always something to tend when you're taking care of your own life. Sometimes you don't have to say a word or cause a scene. It's enough to see the truth clearly and decide who still belongs in your life.